A century beginning in 1750 and ending in 1850 is known as the First Industrial Revolution. It marked a time of great improvements in methods of manufacturing. In 1765, a Scotsman named James Watt invented the steam engine, which would drive that period of innovation when Watt's steam engine was put on a locomotive to pull long strings of cars loaded with raw materials needed for manufacturing processes, or manufactured goods for sale, or on river boats and ships for the same purpose. The first industrial revolution became as much a revolution in transportation as in manufacturing. In 1787, a young artist from Pennsylvania named Robert Fulton made his way to London to study and become a portrait artist. He soon learned that he was rather mediocre as an artist and redirected his ambitions toward engineering. Fulton's first attempt at engineering involved transportation. He designed a canal system that would connect the rural towns and villages of England. Fulton rejected the idea of using locks to move vessels to different elevations and designed inclined planes for the purpose. He also thought of moving barges across valleys by way of an elevated aqueduct and having specialized barges moving different products. While the British government did use a bridge design Fulton developed to cross canals, his canal design was flatly rejected. Fulton left London and went to Paris, where he took up naval engineering. Fulton designed a submarine he named the Nautilus that could slip up under a ship and place a mine on the hull. The French flatly rejected it as an ungentlemanly way to engage in war. While in Paris, Fulton found good fortune when he met Chancellor Robert Livingston, the American ambassador to the court of France and the holder of a navigation monopoly on the Hudson River. Livingston encouraged Fulton to experiment with steamboats on the Seine. Fulton was not the first inventor of a steam-powered boat. Fulton developed the first commercially feasible boat. In the 1770s, a clockmaker named John Fitch decided to experiment with steam-powered boats, but England was keeping the American colonies from importing the Watt engine. Fitch decided to build an engine from his own design. In August of 1787, before the delegates of the Constitutional Convention, John Fitch demonstrated the first steam-powered boat on the Delaware River in Philadelphia. Fitch's first design was a jet-driven boat, but the engine was low pressure, making the boat very low power. Being a clockmaker, Fitch had a tendency to design his inventions with complexity and demonstrated his ability to design complex mechanical devices with his oar-powered steamboat. Fulton applied the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, with a drive system with two paddle wheels, one on each side of the vessel. The wheel turned on an axle, and the large paddle boards on the wheel had a much greater surface area than the oars, giving the boat a stronger push. With Fitch's success, a Revolutionary War veteran decided to try his hand at naval engineering and architecture. Colonel John Stevens III developed a steam engine with a vertical coil-type boiler. The drive system his engine would power was a screw propeller. His boat is what most people today refer to as a steam-powered launch. Fulton's first attempt at building a steamboat resulted in a vessel too weak for its machinery. But learning from his mistake, he was able to build a boat that was able to ply the waters of the River Seine a whole 4 miles an hour. With this success, Fulton was able to appeal to the government of New York and receive a monopoly for steam transportation on the Hudson River. He returned to America and quickly contracted a boat builder to build a boat of his design. The boat was the Clermont. The Hudson is a river and a tidal estuary, meaning that it is a transition zone between fresh water and the sea. The Hudson flows two ways, upriver during high tides and downstream during low tides. Fulton's design was developed specifically for that type of waterway. The Clermont was built like a small version of an ocean-going schooner and was even equipped with a mizzen sail. The hull had cargo holds. The top deck had a canopy to keep passengers on the deck comfortable. On the first journey of the Clermont, Fulton arrived at the estate named Clermont, the home of Chancellor Livingston, a 110-mile distance in 24 hours. The following day, Fulton took the boat into Albany, a distance of 40 miles in 8 hours. The Fulton steamboat worked well in the tidal estuaries, and Fulton and Livingston became very prosperous with their monopoly of steam navigation on the Hudson. But a large segment of the American people had been crossing the Appalachian Mountains since the end of the French-Indian War, and with the conclusion of the American Revolution, people poured into the region to have their own land along with the prosperity one enjoys when he is master of his own property. That was something that they could not experience in their mother country, and it was getting more and more difficult to have that opportunity in the East. The problem that the pioneers of the American interior faced was the difficulty of shipping their products to American cities in the East. The Appalachian Mountains are an old range geologically speaking, and wore down to heights very low compared to the mountains of the far west. But they are still steep, wide, and rugged, and it was economically unfeasible to carry large loads of products across the mountains by wagon train. But what the people of the West had was a vast network of rivers that would carry large loads on a single vessel several hundred miles to the Spanish city of New Orleans, where their products could be purchased and shipped on large sailing vessels around to the East Coast. Today, the rivers that flow from the western slopes of the Appalachians is called the Western Rivers because at the time people began crossing the mountains that were entering the American West. Being a resourceful people, the American pioneers became boat builders. Some were nothing more than large log rafts. Others were a flat-bottomed barge called a flatboat, and other boats had keels and were called keel boats. Rafts were the least efficient. They were easier to build, and no labor went into the milling of lumber. The problem was they were uncomfortable for the passengers, and they provided little to no protection for the cargo. The flatboat was easy to build, provided some comfort for the crew, and some protection for both the cargo and the crew. The problem with flatboats was they were one-way vessels, which meant that a long walk or horse ride up the Natchez Trace had to be calculated into the journey. The flatboat did not go to waste in New Orleans. The lumber was purchased or scavenged for the building of shotgun houses. The keel boat was the workhorse of the western rivers. The craftsmen that constructed keel boats had to have some knowledge of naval architecture. The keel provided stability, and the deep hull provided plenty of space and protection for cargoes. And with a crew of men, a round trip could be made on a keel boat. To go upstream, the crews would stay close to the bank in slack water or in an upstream eddy current and pole the vessel upstream. Sometimes the boat would have a mast on which a sail could be used, and when the downstream current was not too strong, oars could be used, but that was very rare. Often the men would have to pull the boat by a rope from the shoreline, a method called warping. A trip that would take a keelboat 6 weeks to go downstream would take 6 months to return. And that returning vessel's supplies, not easily made or found in the wilderness, would fill the cargo hold. While a flatboatman was usually a farmer, trapper, or a long hunter, delivering his goods to market, a keelboatman was a professional riverman. New Orleans was a Spanish city, and the United States had an agreement with Spain for right of deposit at New Orleans. But Napoleon's rise to power and his threat of instability to the nations of continental Europe motivated the American government to negotiate a purchase of New Orleans as a way to ensure that the American interior would always have access to the sea. With the Treaty of Paris in 1763 ending the French-Indian Wars between France and Britain, Louisiana west of the Mississippi plus the Isle of Orleans was ceded to Spain. In the Treaty of Ildefonso in 1801, King Charles IV of Spain was forced to turn Louisiana back over to Napoleon. Napoleon had aspirations of becoming an emperor of a vast empire spanning 2 continents. The American part of his empire would center around Spanish Louisiana and Saint Domingue, now known as Haiti, in the Caribbean. Napoleon soon realized he could neither afford the defense of his western holdings or spare the men needed to control such an empire, for he needed them for his continental war in Europe. The Spanish revoked the agreement with the United States for right of deposit in New Orleans in 1798. While an agreement in 1801 returned the right of deposit to the American government was concerned that the right could be revoked every time the 2 nations became at odds with one another. James Monroe and Robert Livingston were sent to Paris to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans. While attempting to purchase just the Isle of Orleans, Napoleon surprised the American delegation with an offer of the entire Louisiana territories at a very reasonable price. When Thomas Jefferson learned of the offer, he instructed the negotiators to get the deal closed while he searched for funding for the deal. Thomas Jefferson believed that the federal government didn't have unlimited powers and that the state's representatives would have to deliberate and vote on the funding for the purchase of Louisiana. But Jefferson believed long debate may just cost them the deal. He did not want to see a hostile power on our western border. Jefferson sought funding on his own. The money to purchase Louisiana was found in banks in Britain. It is unknown what the Americans told the British bankers what the money was used for. Since Britain was at war with Napoleon, they certainly wouldn't have told the British they wanted to pass it to Britain's enemies in exchange for a large piece of the American continent. Jefferson was willing to pay $10 million for New Orleans, but instead got the whole of Louisiana for $15 million. The purchase doubled the size of the United States. It reached from the mouth of the Mississippi River to its headwaters in Minnesota and west to the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains. The lands made up a good part of 16 states and cost 3 cents an acre. Chancellor Robert Livingston became the American ambassador to France in those years shortly after the Louisiana Purchase. Livingston had had a monopoly in New York for navigation on the Hudson River. Livingston knew the potential for commerce on the western rivers. Once he met Fulton, he set in motion a plan to gain a steamboat monopoly on the Mississippi River.